Good morning, everyone. Hello. Welcome to our session today. Uh, we are very pleased to another webinar with AGT Soileos. My name is Leo, and as a sales director for Canada and USA, I am delighted to be your host for today's session. So we are thrilled you've taken the time to join us to explore crucial aspects of soil testing and interpretation and effective crop nutrition strategies. So at AGT Soileos, we are committed to providing valuable insights and support to the agricultural industry, helping you achieve healthy and productive crops for many seasons to come. So today, we are incredibly fortunate to have with us leading experts in soil science and soil test interpretation. So we have today Blake Weiseth, corporate agronomist of Western Ag, and also Jason McNamee, general manager of AGT Soileos. Welcome. So a little bit about Blake. So Blake, corporate agronomist with Western Ag and a professional agrologist, grew up on a farm near Shaunavon, Saskatchewan. He holds PhD in soil science from the University of Saskatchewan, where he researched phosphorus use efficiency and water quality. So he was recognized as the 2024 Outstanding Young Agrologist. Congratulations, Blake. His insights into soil testing and interpretations will be invaluable as we plan for a successful and balanced fertility program in 2026. And Jason. So Jason is a biogeologist and ecology expert with 20 years of experience in biotech research and development. So a founder of Lucent Biosciences and general manager at AGT Soileos. So today, together, Jason and Blake will discuss soil sampling, understanding soil analysis and soil reports, as well as discuss practical ways to integrate Soileos, that's interesting, into your operations and crop fertility plans. So this is a dynamic session, so please feel free to submit your questions in the chat box you see over there at any point during the presentation. So thanks, Jason and Blake, with you guys.
All right. Well, thanks for the introduction, Leo. I will get started with sharing a little bit of background context on the discussion. Jason, feel free just to chime in if you have any questions or comments. As I'm sharing my screen here, if someone can just give me a thumbs up that they can see my screen and that it's all in presentation mode. Jason's giving me a thumbs up. Leo is too. So we are good to go, folks. All right. So, yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to participate today, for the invitation from the Soileos group. What we're talking about today, as was mentioned in the introduction, is soil analysis. And so the title of my presentation is What Your Soil Isn't Telling You Yet. And a subtitle I have there is Moving from Metrics to Mechanisms. And so what I mean by that is instead of just looking at a number, which you might see on a soil test report, let's try to understand what are the underlying mechanisms, the processes behind this that are actually influencing, of that total nutrient in the soil. What is the pool? What is the proportion that your crop is actually seeing? Because that's what we're ultimately interested in as farmers, as agronomists. And so really, by way of introduction, what you'll hear me talk about throughout this presentation is a couple of core pieces of our technology that we use at Western Ag. The first is the Plant Root Simulator Probe. And by way of introduction, I want to start going back about 30 years to the early 1990s, where there was a young professor from University of Saskatchewan, Dr. Jeff Shano, who was thinking about assessing that bioavailable nutrient pool and wanted to approach it from a different perspective, from a nutrient extraction by accounting for factors that influence, what are these dynamic factors that actually influence what is that bioavailable nutrient pool. And so his research led to the development of the plant root simulator probe. And from that one field near Central Butte, Saskatchewan, it's been used in many different research applications across the globe. And indeed, you can see in this image here some of the waypoints where the PRS technology has been used in research applications. So literally on every continent except for Antarctica. But I just say this to highlight the strong research basis of the use of this technology. And at the farm gate level, it is used widely as well. In this image here, just showing samples, locations from across largely the Canadian prairies into a few of the northern states. But again, just going to sort of the question for the day, really what we're interested in, or what I want us to help think about when we consider that soil fertility and making a crop nutrition plan is within the context of nutrient supply relative to crop nutrient demand, and importantly, what factors are influencing that supply of nutrients to the crop. And so let's start with crop nutrient demand. Well, this is probably not a surprise to anyone that crops have a demand for nutrients. But just to provide some context to that, what we're looking at here is some data from the International Plant Nutrition Institute, where you have various cereal grains across the side of the table and reporting the nutrient uptake and removal numbers for our macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur. And so what your eye is probably drawn to is nitrogen. And indeed, crops do have a high demand for nitrogen, but also very closely matched to that, and sometimes eclipses it, is the demand for potassium. So plants have a high demand for potassium. You can see that reflected in the uptake numbers. But what's a little bit different from potassium relative to nitrogen is what is actually removed in the harvested grain. Much of the potassium in a crop is in the above ground plant material, the leaves and the straw, and not in the grain. So if we're just removing the harvested grain from the field, not as great of potassium removal as nitrogen. We also see that the demand changes according to various crops. So if you look at some pulse crops in relation to spring wheat, as an example for peas, a 50 bushel per acre pea crop compared to a 40 bushel per acre spring wheat crop, you're seeing that the uptake and removal is about twice that for peas relative to wheat. So just to highlight that the crop itself influences what it is going to be demanding for nutrient, and we'll get into the reason for that later. Just a little bit more on this aspect of demand. Well, what about when is the crop taking up nutrients? So in this example, looking at wheat, we can see crop stage along the x-axis and then nutrient uptake along the y. And we see that nitrogen and potassium, those uptake curves follow very closely to one another, where we see sort of a linear increase take up to about 6 weeks, and then it tapers off throughout the rest of the growing season. And for canola, a similar sort of pattern, but we do see potassium uptake increasing well up into crop harvest. And so the magnitude of the uptake, though, again, for nitrogen and potassium, much greater than for sulfur and phosphorus. And just to reinforce, where is this potassium existing within the plant? Largely within the leaves and the stem. And so that's why when we're harvesting for the grain, we don't have removal rates as high as for nitrogen. All right, so we've established that crops demand nutrients. Well, what role do they play in the plant? And so, of course, we know nutrients contribute very much to the productivity of the crop, to yield production, but they also serve other functions. And so for potassium, involved in enzyme activation, photosynthetic rate, the transport of sugars through the plant, protein synthesis, starch production, and importantly, energy processing during plant stress. And one of those stressors that we've dealt with in the last number number of years across the Canadian prairies is drought stress. And so I just want to dwell a little bit on that. We see that potassium does play an important role in regulating water movement throughout the plant. And that is because it is important in regulating the stomata activity. So the stomata are an organelle on the plant leaf that opens and closes to release water into the atmosphere in a process that we call transpiration. And that serves an important function of cooling off the plant and helping it to persevere through that heat stress during the summer. And so if you look at some interesting data, study from Scogli, he was looking at how does soil potassium status influence the crop transpiration rate? And so what we have in this figure here is across the x-axis, the time period that a crop is exposed to hot or windy conditions. And on the y-axis, we have the transpiration rate. And then the three different treatments of the study were different soil potassium conditions. So this red line is a severe potassium deficiency, and the black line is adequate potassium in sort of contrasting ends of the spectrum. And so what we see here is in a severe potassium deficiency, that dark red line, after a very short period of exposure to hot, windy conditions, you see a drastic increase in transpiration rate and a relatively long time for it to return to that baseline condition. And this is in contrast to when you have adequate potassium, just a short exposure to that hot, windy conditions results in a relatively minor increase in transpiration and very quickly returning to baseline. So some other data to sort of explore this interaction between soil potassium status and water use efficiency. In this instance, we're looking at spring triticale. And in this study, it considered two factors. One was that soil potassium status. So in this instance, if you do not have potassium added, so a potassium deficiency, or when you add potassium fertilizer, so adequate potassium status, and then looking at different rainfall treatments. And so in the potassium deficiency situation, looking at when you compare irrigated irrigated moisture situation to rain-fed, see a quite drastic decrease in yield when you have inadequate potassium. And so to put it another way, if you have a potassium deficiency, you can increase your soil's supply rate simply by adding moisture. Now, in the other situation, when you have adequate potassium, not much of a difference in yield between irrigated and rain-fed. And so, again, just speaking to the role that potassium has in improving water use efficiency. And finally, looking at some data from soybean, we see along the y-axis here, what we're reporting is a percent yield increase from added potassium fertilizer as a function of how much rainfall you have in a 12-week period along the x-axis. And so when you're in a drought situation, 5 inches of in-season rainfall, you're going to see a large increase in yield from added potassium fertilizer, again, because of its ability to mitigate drought risk. But as you increase your moisture, you're reducing your percent yield increase because you have a better ability to use that nutrient, that water. So now the second end of the part of the equation is your soil's ability to supply nutrients. And so really we all can understand that the soils can have a very high total amount of nutrient, but that's not particularly meaningful for us as growers or agronomists. What we want to know again is how much is that available to the crop actually see. And so carrying on with the example of potassium, we can see that a very high proportion, up to 90 to 98%, can be in the unavailable form held within the primary soil minerals. And so a relatively small proportion is what we classify as slowly available. So that's what the potassium that might be trapped within the soil colloids or sorbed to the surfaces of those colloids. And so there's a relatively small proportion that can be released from those soil colloids to the plant. And that third category is the readily available proportion, what exists in the soil water and sorbed to the surfaces, but it represents only about 0.1 to 2% of that total pool. So the question that we should ask ourselves is, how can we understand what are the factors that actually control what is available to the plant? And
Hey
really,
Blake,
yes.
hey, I just if you can go back one.
Yep.
So in your previous example, one of the things that you showed was that with increasing rainfall or increasing moisture, whether that was irrigation or rainfall,
Yep.
we saw an increase in the yield
Yep.
and that was probably, as I understand, directly correlated to the availability of potassium.
Yep.
And so in this case here, where we have soil water, does that mean that if we can increase soil water, we can increase bioavailability of this nutrient?
Yeah, and so that's a great teaser, Jason, and we'll get into that a little bit. But the short answer is because potassium is a nutrient that moves largely by diffusion, the soil moisture and temperature have a strong influence on its mobility. And so you have more moisture, greater rates of diffusion, more availability to the plant. So yeah, great question. And then relating to the data we looked at, when you increase your soil moisture, you're just going to have a much more mobile potassium. So yeah,
Well,
great
thanks.
question there. So again, really when we want to consider, or think about again of that total nutrient pool, what is the crop actually seeing? Well, really it's based on, the nutrients that are existing in the soil solution. We call that the intensity, and then the rate that those nutrients are being replenished from the less available pools, and we call that the quantity. So you can imagine here this crop, it has roots that are exploring in that nutrient solution. It's immediately taking up those readily available nutrients, and those are being replenished. Equilibrium is being reestablished from that less available pool. And so you can understand then that that crop rooting volume makes such a strong influence on the crop's ability to take up that nutrient. And so again, this is where we consider the plant root simulator probes, which we use. The plant root is really just a surface that is in that soil solution. It's exploring for nutrients. It's acting as a sink of nutrients. And in a way, the plant root simulator probe also is acting as that sink of nutrients. So we're really trying to capture that mechanism, that process. And sort of the textbook that we use to inform our interpretation is largely based on the work of Dr. Stanley Barber, former USass graduate, went on to study soil science at Purdue University, and he spent the bulk of his career devoted to understanding at a mechanistic level what are the factors that influence how a crop actually takes up nutrients. And so if you're interested, you can scan that QR code for more on the story of Stan Barber. It's quite a great story. Now, for us as farmers or agronomists, what we're really interested in is, will a crop respond to potassium fertilization? And so what are some factors that we should consider? And this goes back, the first one goes back to what I suggested, that we should think about it within the context of supply and demand. What is the soil supplying for nutrient, and how does that relate to what the crop is actually demanding? And it's really influenced by the plant and soil interactions, rooting volume. And so this is some data showing the in the top 20 centimeters of a soil, what is the percentage of that soil volume that is occupied by plant roots? And we can see that it varies within different crop types. So something like corn or oats, we see a relative rooting volume of about 0.5%. Something like soybean, nearly twice that at 0.91%. And so this is one of the reasons why we understand that pulse crops, soybeans, peas are really efficient scavengers of nutrients, because they have an extensive rooting system that's able to scavenge and explore that rooting volume. And then water. And so leading into Jason's point, water has a strong influence on whether or not that, or the proportion of that nutrient that's going to be available to the crop. And so we know that nutrients can move either by mass flow or diffusion. And so to illustrate mass flow, you can see something like nitrate or sulfate just moving through the soil water. But there's other nutrients that are not able to do that, and they move largely by diffusion. And so, as an example, nitrogen or sulfur, these are what we consider our mobile nutrients, move largely by mass flow, whereby phosphorus and potassium move largely by diffusion. And we consider these our immobile nutrients. And, practically, I guess, why we should care about that is the mechanism that they move influences how far and the speed at which they move from the soil to the crop root. And of course, the root surface is where we're actually seeing that uptake occurring. And so something like mass flow moving up to about 10 centimeters per day, whereby around the rooting volume, something moving by diffusion, 0.01 to 0.1 centimeters per day. So a much slower rate of movement. And soil moisture, again, influences it largely because it influences, that diffusion pathway. So if you have decreasing soil moisture, you're going to have a longer diffusion path, a greater opportunity for absorption, desorption reactions. It's just going to slow down that rate of availability.
Hey,
Similarly,
hey,
yep,
Blake, can you go back one there?
yep.
You're going pretty quick there. Can you just have just a little discussion here about like what is a adsorption desorption interaction and why that's important?
Sure. So I guess it ultimately relates to, when we consider nutrients, they're existing in an ionic form, right? And so possessing a net positive charge or a net negative charge, depending on the nutrient. So, nitrate, sulfate, phosphate, net negative charge, potassium, net positive charge. And so the soil colloids, so that's a term that kind of encompasses organic matter or clay material in the soil possessing a net negative charge. And so when you have those opposite charges, you can get that sorption reactions. And so that's largely what we're speaking here. And so when you have differing moisture situations, it just influences, the rate that those reactions are occurring.
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. And so sort of the last factor that I want to consider is soil temperature. And so when we think about again diffusion pathways, see this animation here where in a warm soil you're going to have a much faster rate of diffusion compared to a cool soil. Diffusion rate can drop by more than half in a cool soil. So really what this culminates in is when we want to consider, the bioavailability, the movement of nutrients through the soil, it's a function of temperature and moisture. And so in this figure here, when we're talking as potassium as a nutrient, we're looking at, the concentration that's moving to a resin surface like used in the PRS probes. It increases with increasing temperature and increasing moisture. And so really then, how can we account for these factors, these dynamic factors that influence the nutrient availability? Comes back to the use of PRS probes. And so what we do is we have one that is meant to measure the supply rate of anions in the soil, that orange probe, and then a second one that is meant to measure the supply rate of cations, so positive charged elements in the soil. What we have here is a little animation. So hopefully you can see it playing where we insert that probe into the soil, and under moisture conditions, if we zoom in, that resin surface, it has a counter ion charge to it, and it's going to be displaced by the ions existing on the surfaces of those colloids or in that interlayer of the minerals. And so we see this dynamic exchange of ions, and it's influenced by the activity of the ion and the rate of diffusion. And so we can see that this measure is actually sensitive to these factors that influence diffusion. So temperature, as an example, the top set of the top table, as we increase our temperature from 5 to 30 degrees Celsius, our nitrogen and our phosphorus supply rates are increasing. And this is some data from Dr. Jeff Shano. Similarly with soil moisture, starting with 15% field capacity on the bottom of the table and increasing to 100 or 140% field capacity, our rates, our nutrient supply rates are increasing for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur with increased soil moisture. So functionally, how does this actually work in the field? So you can see a couple of images on the screen here. A soil sample is collected, it's taken back to the lab, and that soil is brought to a consistent moisture content, and it's standardized because when we add the probes into that soil under standard conditions of moisture or temperature, we can measure that nutrient supply rate over a 24-hour period. And then importantly, what we can do from that is put it into the second piece of technology we have, which is our PRS Cropcaster software, which is a simulation model that can then model out from that 24-hour period what is going to be available to the crop over the growing season based on the conditions that you are putting into it. So with that said, I'm going to just sort of bring this all together in a case study for you folks. And so we're going to set it up by the situation is, how can we look at canola fertility using the plant root simulator, Cropcaster, and probes. And this is an example from my home neck of the woods in Southwest Saskatchewan. So just to kind of give some context of where we're looking at here, we are in the dark brown soil zone in the southwest part of Saskatchewan. And what we have here is a section of land where we have two different quarter sections that were managed quite differently in terms of their history. And so in the northeast quarter section, this was just a history of annual crop production, pea stubble going into canola. In the southwest quarter section, it had a history of annual baling of the material because there was a feedlot in that corner of this quarter section. And so they would often seed, cereal crop or whatever, but bale that straw and remove the bales from the site. And so what I'm going to do now is just exit out of the PowerPoint presentation and go to the software. Jason, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the software on the screen? All right, we have a thumbs up. So what we're looking at here is this is our PRS Cropcaster. And so what you can see, we start with considering the soil parameters from this location. So we're in the southwest corner. This is the quarter that has the history of baling because it is a feedlot location. And so what we are doing is we're going to account for soil texture first. So really this influences water storage. As we all know, texture has a profound influence on your soil's ability to retain that soil moisture. And again, because as we just finished the discussion that our rates of diffusion are really influenced by soil moisture, we want to account for that. We're also accounting for the growing season conditions, total available water, and because we are within the crop of canola, the maximum temperature at flowering. And when we set these parameters, ultimately what we're establishing is the genetic yield potential of our crop under these conditions. So in this situation, our genetic yield potential is 59 bushels per acre of canola. And then let's look at the soil. So what we have in this corner here, these red lines relate to the, you can think of it as sort of your gas gauge of your various nutrients. And so this is kind of interpreting that soil analysis bit. And what we see here for nitrogen, measured at 41 pounds per acre, the total the total number on the right side here, 176, this is the amount of nutrient that you would need to add to achieve that genetic yield potential. But we also understand that farmers operate businesses and they're interested in operating profitable businesses. And so the rates of fertilizer that you actually apply are going to be based on economics. And so the decision of how much fertilizer to add is based on a nutrient response curve. And so that's what we have on the left side of this model here. So you can see I'm manipulating this nitrogen box, the green graph. And you can see if I move that all the way to the left end of the figure, we're not applying any nitrogen at all in this situation. And under these growing conditions, the model is predicting a 24 bushel per acre canola yield. For every unit of nitrogen that we're adding, you can see we're moving up that yield response curve, and our yield is increasing. You can see the grain filling up the bin, but we're going to get to a certain point where we've sort of passed the apex of the curve, and for every additional unit of nitrogen we're adding, we're getting a marginal increase on our yield. We can also do the similar exercise with phosphorus. So again, you can see based on the shape of this curve, it's quite a steep curve. We're seeing a quite strong response to additional added units of phosphorus. And you can see that reflected in that low supply rate of 3.8 pounds per acre existing soil supply in the soil. And then potassium. We can see also a very sharp increase on that curve. And so getting back to the history of the field situation. So again, this is the quarter where we had a history of baling. You can see a very low potassium supply, 17 pounds per acre. And if we to the other quarter section that did not have the history of baling, under the same moisture and temperature conditions, we've seen a potassium supply rate of 71 pounds per acre.
Well,
And
it's really significant.
you can look at that potassium response curve and see that it is essentially flat because we have no response to additional potassium. We have a pretty good supply. The Going back to the low potassium field, what we can see here is if we just hold our nutrients in place, but we change our growing season conditions, I want you to look at the supply of potassium. So in this situation, let's move down to a drought. We're talking 3.9 inches of in-season moisture. Our potassium supply rate is about 9 pounds per acre. And if we're not changing any fertilizer, we're not changing any other parameters, just by increasing our moisture, we've moved from 9 pounds per acre up to 25 pounds per acre. So this is just to highlight for potassium in particular, a nutrient that is controlled by rates of diffusion. If you increase your soil moisture, you're increasing your soil's ability to supply that potassium fertilizer. So now what we can do, and I'll pass it, this will be sort of the last part on my kind of formal presentation, Jason, just to give you the heads up here. But I do just want to look a little bit more on that aspect of return on investment economics. And so what I want us to do here is we're going to slide this model, slide the moisture back down to our starting point of 7 inches of in-season precipitation. And we can input our fertilizer costs into the model as well. So our costs, dollars per pound of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur. And we put our predicted crop price for canola, let's just say 13.50 a bushel. Who knows where it's going to go in the market, but that's sort of the number that we're choosing for this situation. And we can also account for our other expenses on the farm, other costs of production. But what we can ask the model to do is we can ask the model, sorry, we're going to see if this one will work. Oh, it's crashing on me. All right, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second here, Jason. Just bear with me. It should take 2 seconds to reopen this file here.
No problem.
Okay, So let's share again. Okay, thumbs up if you can see the software on the screen.
Not yet.
Maybe
There
now.
it is.
Okay. Um, so yeah, what we've done here, we can ask the model to optimize, select the optimum fertilizer rate to give us the best return on our investment. And so in this situation, what the model is predicting is adding, just for round numbers, 70 pounds of nitrogen, 30 pounds of phosphorus, 80 pounds of potassium, and 11 pounds of sulfur to give us a 50 bushel per acre yield. And so again, because we're dealing in this quarter section where we've had that history of baling, we're seeing quite a significant response to that added potassium fertilizer. Um, if we were in the situation where we have the history where it wasn't baled, we can also pull that up and working under the same parameters, optimizing the model, we can see that now the optimal rate of potassium is only 20 pounds per acre. Basically the same kind of geography, same field, same conditions. So I think at that point I'll pause on sort of the formal part of the presentation, but turn it back to Jason if you have any kind of follow-up questions, comments, or maybe we can look at some questions from the audience as well.
Yeah, I had one question, and then there are some questions from the audience, Blake. My question is when we look at the crop caster and we look at, say, we need so many pounds of nitrogen, for example, or potassium, or even the uh, sulfur. When we're adding these particular nutrients, what is the importance of the form of the nutrient that we're putting in? For example, there are, there's in phosphorus, there's MAP, there's DAP. In potassium, there's sulfated potash, there's regular KCl. What is the difference, and do we need more? Do we need less? And I think that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Great topic, Jason. And so you do make a great point, whereby the form, excuse me, can influence again that bioavailability. And there are a number of factors that would influence it, but one that I would say that we're sort of seeing, or that's becoming an interesting conversation is the influence that a fertilizer form can have on soil pH and potentially modifying soil pH and therefore changing the availability of the nutrient. So I'll even share a little bit on my recent PhD research where we looked at 8 different forms of phosphorus fertilizer, comparing your traditional monoammonium phosphate, a rock phosphate, and a product that has MAP plus an elemental sulfur incorporated within it. And what we saw in particularly one of my research sites that had a high pH, the same pounds per acre of actual nutrient being applied in different treatments, but this MAP plus elemental sulfur product resulting in a higher uptake of the nutrient from the crop. And what our assessment was is it was because of that pH modification. And so
Yeah,
that's just one example of how knowing your soil conditions, knowing the factors that are going to limit your nutrient availability, in this case, high pH limiting, causing increased phosphorus fixation, and possibly kind of that acidification of the soil leading to improved bioavailability. So again, we didn't directly look at it in the study, but the assumption is then you could apply less and get the same response, right?
true.
So, whether it is again looking at pH, a pH effect, or just simply reducing tie up due to other mechanisms, the form is an important consideration.
Yeah, pH is such a big factor, particularly in Saskatchewan, where we're mostly high pH until you get up more into the north and the west part of the province where we get, that real mosaic of pHs up there. But that, we have the standard curve. I don't know whose chart that was that ever came out, but the one where we show nutrient bioavailability, and as pH increases past 7, the bioavailability of nutrients decreases.
Yeah, and I mean, something that we're certainly seeing is even in areas where that are not traditionally acidic soils, we are seeing, acidification starting to creep in. And I mean, it's not to be unexpected, as we know, ammonium-based fertilizers do cause an acidifying effect. And in our, direct seeding, minimum tillage systems, where we're largely banding in those nutrients in pretty much the same sort of shallow soil layer year after year, it's a relatively small volume of soil where you're seeing this pH modification. And so I guess that's kind of one message for folks in the webinar too, is even if you are in an area where, you might not have traditionally thought that you pay attention to soil pH, it might be something to start looking at for sure.
Great, thanks. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, but I think they're more. We'll get to those. I'll do my presentation quickly here, and then we'll get to those other questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay. Oops. Okay, does everybody see full screen there?
Yep.
Good, thank you for the thumbs up. Hi, thanks everybody. Blake, awesome. I think these sort of discussions, I don't think we can have enough of them, especially as we're focused on the return on investment outcome for our end users, the farmers. So when I ask the question about form, that is something that is very important, and this is what we bring to the ecosystem, is we deliver nutrients differently. I'm just going to tell you just a little bit about who we are and how we got here, and then why our methodology and our technology is so different than what we've experienced in the past in the fertilizer industry. So our company is AGT Soileos, as Leo introduced us. We are a partnership with AGT Foods and Ingredients, who really help us in the ecosystem and provide a ton of value and a lot of wisdom. And Lucent Biosciences. Lucent Biosciences is where we develop the technology. I'm one of the founders at Lucent Biosciences. And then together we make AGT Soileos, or where we make the product Soileos. A little bit about me. I'm originally a small town kid from the Balgonie area. Played a lot of hockey in Saskatchewan. And then I moved on to the coast where we developed this technology. And I'm also a dad. These two young men are both in university, taking a combination of business and science, and pretty proud of those young men. And they're really the reason why I do what I do. I think it's very important that we provide better outcomes. And so this is the real difference in the way that we deliver nutrients from what you've seen in the past. So, for example, the core of crop nutrient delivery technology hasn't really changed much in the last 80 years. Your choices are an oxide of a mineral, a salt of some sort, or a chelate of some sort. So if you think back, say 1955, the monoammonium phosphate and the urea you used at that time is the exact same urea and monoammonium phosphate you're using today. What we have done is we have developed this new patent. You can read the title of the patent on the right-hand side here. And that is compositions, systems, and methods for delivery of an element in response to biological demand. And really the secret in our technology and why we deliver differently is instead of having a salt to hold the minerals, we have found a way to use carbon-based products. And what we use actually is we use oat hulls, which we get from a dehulling facility in Aberdeen, Saskatchewan. So primarily it's cellulose that we use as the platform for delivery of the nutrients. However, there obviously is some starch and protein, as dehulling is never perfect, and so there's some residual seed left in the material. And so what ends up happening is our products are water insoluble as compared to what we're used to. And so what that means is we need a different way of getting those nutrients off. And so it turns out in the soil, there's a lot of carbon in soils. It depends what your organic matter is, but a lot of that organic matter is not active carbon. And what our product is an active carbon source, which means it's a food source for the soil microbes and microbiome. And therefore, when your soil is warm and moist, the nutrients are released. And so you get an on-time delivery of your nutrients every time, which allows you to maximize your genetic potential. Because when your soil is warm and moist is also when your crop requires nutrients at its optimal. So we've taken advantage of this timing in the ecosystem to deliver nutrients when we need them. So one of the things that we did when we first developed this technology, because it is such a paradigm shift in the agriculture industry, is we've run a ton of trials to figure out how the product works, where it works, where the technology should be applied, how many, what's the right application rate, under what conditions. And so we know how to really improve the return on investment outcome for the farmer. And I'm just going to go through just to give you an example. These are all farmer trials that we've run over the past few years. They're all replicated strip plot trials. They're all with, we use swap map or some sort of electrical conductivity mapping so that we can really dial in where our products work best. So this is a 2021 field trials, 2022, 2023, 2024, and I don't have 2025s yet. So as I suggested, our product delivers nutrients differently. And so our product isn't influenced so much by pH or soil texture because the mode of action is really unique. So what I did here is I took the Saskatchewan Agriculture website information on micronutrients, and there's a link in this. I can share this for you. And what we see is that in typical nutrient application scenario, as pH increases, the bioavailability of micronutrients decreases. And in fact, most nutrients decreases, although not all. I should use that chart in this now that I think about it. But for typical applications, we see that the bioavailability of nutrients, and particularly micronutrients, is influenced by pH. As pH increases, bioavailability decreases. Sandy soils are more likely to show a micronutrient deficiency than a clay soil. And organic matter also is important. So if we have a high organic matter or a low organic matter, we typically see a good result with our with our technology, but it's also where we typically would see uh, lower concentration of micronutrients in the soil. And so then we would typically look at, for those, Blake, there are some people who don't use PRS probes, believe it or not. And there are some people who don't soil test, which is also, kind of a little bit of shocking for me. And but there are some really good tools out there that we can use to help us if we're in those sorts of situations and we're looking for an opportunity where this might work. So this is it's called the Saskatchewan Soil Information System, and this allows us to choose by the soil texture or pH, and we can dive really deep into a certain area and find, what the soil information system tells us, and then we can decide is this an opportunity where our technology would be valuable for folks or not. So this is just an example of soil textures where the light colors are sandier soils and the darker colors like the blues and the pinks are medium grain to clayey soils. And there's your pH. This is the North Battleford area here. And you can see that your pH is in the North Battleford area is really diverse. However, so when we look at that, we might want to look into the higher pH areas where our technology might have a better value for the end user. Because again, we really are trying to improve the return on investment outcome for our farmer customers. One of the interesting things about our product, and Blake, you used a different crop removal rate calculator than this one. I got this one from the Sask Canola Council. But so our products are typically 10% of a potassium, somewhere around 5% of sulfur, and somewhere around between 5 and 10% of a micronutrient. And the rest is like as I said, the carbon-based platform. And so typically we would apply our technology at somewhere around 10 pounds an acre. So that would give us somewhere around half a pound to a pound of actual micronutrient product. And that would also give us a really nice dispersion, like number of prills per lineal drill foot. And what we see here is if we were, say, using our zinc product, you're going to get some potassium, you're going to get some sulfur, you're getting a food source for your soil microbiome. But say you were growing canola in Saskatchewan, these are pounds of nutrient per 100 bushels of grain produced. So say you're getting 50 bushels an acre, that would mean that for zinc, you would be removing 0.08 pounds of zinc per acre. So if we're putting like a pound of actual zinc per acre, we should see residual zinc at the end of the year. And in fact, we've done a number of trials where we see not only an improvement in yield in year one, but also residual zinc in that field for year two. So we can improve an outcome in year one, but we can follow it into year two and year three, particularly if we're soil testing and we're using appropriate technology to do so. So this is from a trial that we had done at Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada. And what you see is that when you use our product, the control in this case was a zinc sulfate product versus our Soileos product. And really what you see is that there's an improvement in the soil microbial biomass carbon. In this case, it was somewhere around 20%. But this shouldn't be really surprising because there's a food source in the soil now for your soil microbes, so your microbial biomass increases. One of the cool things about the technology that is really interesting is that our product being a dry granular prill and having a high surface area, it's not like the typical salt-based fertilizers that you have. And so what we did is we ran a replicated freeze-thaw trial in Humboldt at the Prairie Agricultural Machinery Institute. And what we find is that when we use our product doesn't clump when we freeze and thaw, which of course it's carbon based. It shouldn't. However, traditional salt-based products do clump. When we blend our product into the traditional um, salt-based products, we find that our product helps them not to clump and helps them to flow better. And that just makes sense because our product is got a high porosity, it's carbon-based, and it can absorb some water, so thereby acting somewhat as a desiccant. One of the things about the technology, again, it's carbon-based, it's very durable. And we've had a lot of compliments on how well it works uh, going through equipment, whether that is at the retail through a blending facility or going straight through in a saddle tank for different applications. So that's been really, really fantastic. So we rarely get any negative feedback on product handling. And of course, our products are made in Saskatchewan. This is our plant in Rosetown. We use locally sourced oat hulls that we get from Aberdeen, Saskatchewan. So, you know, we really do support Western Canadian jobs, and Western Canada is our priority. We have some outstanding sales reps in Saskatchewan. I'm your Saskatchewan sales rep, so I'm founder and general manager, but I'm also your sales rep. And if you need me at your farm to talk, I'm willing to do it. And we have some great guys in Ontario, great guys in Manitoba and Alberta, and we have spent a lot of effort to ensure that the advice and the quality of our product is second to none. And that's it for me. I'm going to stop sharing. And thank you for putting those in there. Okay, we have a number of questions. There are going to be some tough ones here, Blake. Hopefully we can get to it. One was an interesting one, more of a business question, really. That is that the PRS technology has been developed for some time, but it's not super common in the industry. And the question is, what is the barrier of the adoption of PRS?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So yeah, I think to the point, I mean, it's been around kind of directly as a technology for 30 years, and even preceding that, the use of ion exchange membranes as a tool for assessing nutrient bioavailability even predates that. Yeah, in terms of kind of the uptake, I think really it is quite a different paradigm compared to, I guess, what you would call
Yeah.
a soil nutrient extraction, right? And so I think, folks being used to a nutrient extraction, that's kind of what you get used to, and sort of the mindset that you're in. And so, yeah, in order to change that and look at something else, it takes time. Now that said, as a tool being used on farm, we are use fairly extensively across the prairies, about 1 million acres a year, sort of thing. But yeah, it's has taken some time for sure.
I know all about the difficulty of adopting a new technology. It's a very common problem I deal with. Um, Hey, here's a good question that we had. This, I guess, is for me, but oh no, this one's for you, Blake. And that is, can you top dress or foliar apply potassium under drought conditions to help reduce drought stress? Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, good question. Personally, I haven't done any of my own research in this space, but I'm thinking to sort of the uptake curve that we showed earlier on in the presentation. The thing with potassium uptake is it does occur, throughout the entirety of the growing season. So I think, if you were to get it on early enough where you're, still at kind of that yield potential stage, I think, yeah, there is an opportunity there. Now, personally, research experience, I don't have any personal experience looking at that, but that's, I think mechanistically, there would be potential in that.
Cool. We had another question that we actually came in earlier in the week, and that was with respect to Soileos, and that was, can you broadcast, or does the product have to be applied in furrow? And I think that's a great question. I think generally speaking, broadcast is not as good a way to apply fertilizer. Would you agree with that, Blake?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the in furrow application generally is best efficiency, I guess, in short terms. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I would also say to folks that, if you saw where we've done a ton of trials, and sorry, we kind of ripped through that, or we went through it fairly quickly. But in the United States, most of the fertilizer application is broadcast. So in that case, we did broadcast all of those fields, and we have some very good results from the broadcast. But we would typically recommend to put the product in furrow. Most of our customers to date are bulk blending with phosphorus source, typically MAP, and going right straight down in the seed row in the spring. That's the typical method of application. Do we have any more questions here? Sorry. Broadcast in furrow. Oh, there's a very technical question here, Blake, and it's I'm not sure if we have enough time to go into it, but the question was, what are some of the key ratios we should be looking at for micros and macros to have a well-balanced nutrition package for our crops?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I guess the short answer I'll say is it depends. But a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think what we see through this presentation, if you think of the factors that influence nutrient availability and movement, really it's governed by the moisture, temperature, and so if you think of all these interactions are complex and dynamic, and so you do hear a lot about ratios of different nutrients to dial it in. Really, I think a dynamic measure like a plant root simulator, you're sort of accounting for those ratios because you're seeing kind of what's actually moving to that sink, that nutrient sink, that plant root. So yeah, it is certainly, I mean, Liebig's law, the minimum, you need to add multiple nutrients to get the optimum yield combination, but to boil it down to a simple number and ratio, it's complex, I guess.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Rico Thorson says he's used Soileos in nursery and orchard production in the past few years with really good results. Thanks, Rico. That's pretty cool. I think that's the bulk of the questions for now. That would be, and plus we're pretty much out of time. And there's a few other questions, but two of them were about boron, so I'll just address that. We have a boron and zinc complex product that is complete. It's registered in the United States. It's gone through CFIA, and we expect that to be registered in Canada, hopefully before the end of this year or early next year. So we do have a boron, which is it's very interesting. We've done a ton of trials on it. Boron's a different animal because it's a negatively charged ion. And so getting it into this carbon-based form where it's where it doesn't leach or doesn't release was pretty tricky. It took us a couple of years, but now we have that, and it will. We have run several trials with it over the last few years, and we've run manufacturing trials, so we can manufacture and will be manufacturing soon. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much, Blake. Very pleased that you were able to participate in this. And Leo, do you want to take us out?
Yes, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Blake, so for sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you to the participants that send questions to us. So we hope we clarified everything. And so we hope this webinar provided you with valuable knowledge regarding optimizing your fertility plans. And also understanding the role of innovative solutions like Soileos. We can actually help you a lot during your crop season. I know there was a question in the chat about recording of the session. Yes, we will be sharing this webinar with you. Also, additional resource by email in the coming days. So stay tuned on that. So, but we also, as Jason said, we encourage you reaching out to our team. So we have local retailers, also local sales representatives across provinces in Canada and also Midwest United States to check how Soileos can be, once again, a valuable addition to your fertility program, helping you achieve any stronger yields and improving soil health as well as better return on investment. So don't forget, one last comment. Don't forget to follow us on our social media. You type there @Soileos and you will see us across the channels for more agronomic content and also updates. So thank you for participating and joining us today. Bye.